Welcome to week 7, students. This week I'm joined by a special guest, my cat, because as those of you who have cats know, when you're doing something, the cat will always trying to be in front of it. So last week you explored the Burkean parlor. You looked at an ongoing academic conversation. And this week, that research that you've done is going to come into play. You're going to learn how to craft a thesis statement and to use that research to support your thesis statement. We will also talk about the difference between public writing for the symposium and academic writing, that is for the ARP. And of course, we're going to talk about your assignments for the week. So let's get started. The difference between academic and public writing mostly comes down to audience. In public writing, your audience is more broad. You won't necessarily know as much about their background, so you have to make sure that your writing is written in an accessible way without overly complex language. Whereas when you're writing for an academic audience, you can be assured that they have a certain level of education. Perhaps they have shared background in that particular field of research. So it's expected that your writing is going to be a little bit more complex and detailed, and you can use particular words that are unique to that field. So as you work on your ARP and your SSI, keep this in mind. Your ARP is for an academic audience, so it's going to be a more complex argument, whereas your SSI is a presentation with images for a public audience, so you will not be able to make the same argument in both of them. The SSI, or the symposium project, is just going to take a slice of your research and present that for a public audience. So let's talk about thesis statements. Your thesis statement is the central idea that you argue in your project. And you've been working toward your thesis statement for this entire semester. You began by asking questions about what you found interesting or puzzling about your commercial. And from there, you started to think about those questions within the context of some research. So let's talk about how you can take those questions and that research, mix them together, and turn them into a thesis statement. So your thesis statement should be a claim based on your observations and your research, and you should be able to provide quite a bit of support from your research. Now, strong thesis statements spring from your research, and they evolve throughout the course of your research project. They are narrow focused and they promote thinking. On the other hand, a weak thesis statement is usually a really broad statement that you could essentially write a whole book on. It's too much for a single research paper, and it makes a really obvious point and uses the research just to repeat that point rather than using the research to complicate and grow the thesis. Chapter 7 offers you a really useful process for evolving your thesis naturally, so I encourage you to read that carefully and revisit it through the course of this project. If you are a person who works well with models, I have some great models for you. They're from a textbook called They Say, I Say by Gerald Graff, and there are a few models for how you can write a thesis statement. You can see some of them. I'll put them on the screen in editing here now. And there are also some models for how you can incorporate your research. So if you'd like to start with these templates, they aren't the only way that you can incorporate the research, but they are a good starting point. So let's take a look at a sample. This essay is from a student who took English 1110 just a few years ago, and the student analyzes an advertisement from a magazine. Let's find the thesis statement and let's take a look at how he supports that thesis statement through the essay. Now, if you'd like to see the entire project from PSA all the way to ARP, you can find those files on Carmen in the modules. Before I talk through this, push pause on this video, go to the module and read this paper for yourself, and then come back and listen to the rest of this video. So this student analyzed, like I said before, a magazine advertisement. It was an advertisement for paper cups. It's an older ad. And if we take a look at his introduction, you'll see that he uses what's called the upside down triangle method of writing an introduction, where you begin with more general information about the topic and then narrow to a very specific thesis at the end of the paragraph. So we'll see he begins by giving us some context on advertising methods for his reader, and then he moves on to give us some context about World War II advertising, which is necessary because this is an advertisement that was created in America in 1943 during World War II. And then he moves on to a description of the advertisement. It's brief and concise, but still nice and detailed. It's probably pulled directly from his PSA, so you can pull directly from your PSA to create this. So after he describes his ad, then he goes on to state his thesis. His thesis is, although the 1943 Ajax Dinero advertisement appears at first glance to be about selling paper drinking cups, in reality, the ad reveals American World War II anxieties about disease during wartime. The ad uses various methods of manipulating wartime fears to scare the reader into buying the paper cups. So you'll see that it seems to be about X, but it's really about Y template is being used here. The advertisement seems to be about selling paper drinking cups, but it's actually about the anxieties people had about disease during wartime. So we can see how the thesis is created. Now let's take a look at some of his claims and how they're supported. The first claim the student makes after a nice transition is that paper cups seem like fairly mundane objects, but the ad uses strong tactics to make the readers anxious about their health. And then the student goes on to offer support that shows these tactics based on the analysis, again, probably built on what they wrote in their PSA. So you can see there's a lot of support here. All of this in pink is support for that claim. In this next paragraph, the student takes a look at some interesting contradictions in the ad. He says something's interesting because there are other situations when diseases could be transmitted besides sharing a cup of water. So he's addressing the so what question here. And he takes a look at some inconsistencies in the ad, which is a really smart thing to do. That's what makes it interesting. So there may be some strange inconsistencies in your own primary source. Don't be afraid to explore those, to try to figure out why there's an inconsistency there. No advertisement is perfect. You may find that what the ad is trying to do may fly counter to what the ad claims that it's trying to do. So if we go a little bit further, the student brings in a little bit of research on paper water cups when this product came out to give us a little bit of context to help support his claims and to set up for the next argument. And the next claim he makes is, using scary imaging and text, the reader becomes more interested in buying the product. The ad is selling paper cups. And then he goes on to take a look at the text and to bring in some research about the Black Plague, more research about conditions in war camps and real fears of spread of disease, so how this ad really is building on existing fears. He found a lot of research to support that claim. So the student goes on in this vein throughout the paper. Take a look at the rest of the paper. See how the student structures his argument. Pay special attention to what the student does in his conclusion and how he ties it all up. And if you notice something interesting about this paper or you have questions, feel free to talk about it on the discussion forum. And as I said before, you can find the entire project from PSA to ARP in the modules. So most of your time this week should be devoted to working on your secondary source integration, your SSI. Make sure you're devoting plenty of time to that, and feel free to run drafts by me if you have questions. The other project that you have due this week is another process post. It'll be process post number 4. You can find the full prompt on Carmen, but it's going to be more of the same. You're going to find images, you're going to write descriptions, you're going to connect them to your research. So let me know what questions you have, and I look forward to seeing you on the forums.